So, Roger, you've been beekeeper for a very long time now. Tell us about your early life. Where did you grow up? Where were you raised?
Well, I was early part of my life was on a small farm in West Sussex. It was only 33 acres, and it was bought by my grandfather in October 1899. And he wasn't really a farmer; he was actually an artist. And he was known as the cycling artist, and he did drawings of various magazines. One called Cycling, which was, I think, still going, but he actually did work for them, I think, for 63 years. And in his lifetime, he was reputed to have done 26,000 drawings.
Wow.
All for work related. It's all pen and ink, and his work you can find online anywhere. Just punch in Frank Patterson, cycling artist, and up will come a whole load of stuff about him. Anyway, he was 20 years older than my grandmother, and he died in 1952. I was born in 1947, and I never really knew him. And my grandmother was then left a widow, and there was the main farmhouse, and it was a cottage as well. And my father had a brother. He got married first. He lived in the cottage, and my parents lived with my grandmother in her house. It wasn't really a conventional childhood by modern day standards, but it was quite sort of fairly typical of those days, because my parents both met during the war. My father obviously from rural Sussex, but my mother from Kirkcaldy in Fifeshire in Scotland, and which is a sort of fairly big town by Scottish standards. And she worked in a linoleum mill there called Nairns, and she wove canvas for the backing. Anyway, she was in the Air Force as well, and they met during, in the Air Force during the war. And in them days, very few women actually worked. So she came home when she was demobbed, and my parents got married and lived with my grandmother. And I have to say, effectively, my grandmother brought me up. So that was just about it. The farm was let out to tenant farmers who use the land, which is, it's on Sussex clay. It's actually quite poor ground, really. It was used for a turnout for cattle. So it was just feeding meadows. So that's all. Yeah.
And tell us about your first colony. How did you come about to? Beekeepers, or were you the starting point for beekeeping?
Well, my grandfather's reputed to have kept 2 hives. My grandmother said skips, not skips, but I could never ever find any evidence of it. If he did, it was probably for a short time, and somebody else might have looked after him. I doubt if he looked after him. Anyway, I was about 15. Oh, you want to go back when I started? The interest in beekeeping started because my first biology lesson at secondary school in 1959 was on honeybees. And of course, being brought up on the land, I was used to wildlife. It was all around me, although in them days we didn't see it in the terms perhaps as we do now. Anyway, I sort of remembered this, and about 4 years later, I was helping the neighbour with bale cart for I think it must have been hay, because it was June 1963. Anyway, there was some. I was then only 15, and I can't remember what I was doing. It was either driving the tractor or up on the trailer, taking the bales and stacking them. Anyway, I can't remember what happened really, but I went near some bushes, and the farm worker said, don't go near the bushes. There's some bees in there, and it was just brambles. I couldn't see anything, so of course, being a 15-year-old and a boy and wanting to find things out, I look. I sort of saw a whitish beehive in there. So I thought to myself, well, they haven't been used for some time. So I asked them who they were. It happened to be the farmer's son. And I said, boy, they're not used. Oh, no, he hadn't touched them for years, 10 years or so. So I inquired if they were likely to be for sale, bearing in mind my biology lesson 4 years earlier. Anyway, back came the answer, yes, you can have them for £3. And I thought to myself, hang on, £3 for that lot in the bushes that I got to cut out and all the rest of it. And then they said, oh, there's another 2 hives in the barn. So I ended up with 3 WBC hives and a colony, all for £3. So I contacted the teacher who gave me the lesson. And in those days, teachers, lived locally. They didn't come in 20 or 30 miles like some of them do now. Anyway, contacted him and he said, I'll come out. He came out, we cut the bushes out, had a look, and 2 supers of honey absolutely jam-packed full. And but they were pretty bad-tempered bees. So he requeened them for me, and we extracted the honey. And in the August at the annual flower show, I put 2 jars of honey in the honey class.
Wow!
So that's really how I started.
Excellent. And so, how long before you became the chairman of Wisborough Green?
Oh, I was 23 when I was chairman of Wisborough Green. I was on the committee at 18, and it's strange because there was no committee meeting between 1957 and 1964, 7 whole years. And anyway, I think I was on the committee in 1966, I believe. I was 18 anyway. Yeah, must have been 1966. And we started our committee meetings, and the Wisborough Green Association, which I was a member of, started in 1947. And the first chairman was there for 24 years as chairman. And she died in office around about Christmas, I suppose, 1972. Yeah, 1972, I think. 1971. Anyway, we had a crisis meeting, even though there hadn't been a meeting for 7 years. Well, there had, been a few, but there was a spell when they hadn't had a meeting for 7 years before my time. Anyway, they all held a meeting. It was a crisis meeting. Because dear old Miss Heath, the chairman, had passed away. What on earth are we going to do? Who's going to take over? We're going to fold up and all the rest of it. And then the then secretary suggested that I did it. And I was chairman for 26 years. So for the first 50 years of Wisborough Green, we had 2 chairmen. One lasted 26 years, and the other 24.
Wow. I just looked up on an inflation calculator, and your £3 hives back then is about £18 today. So a bit of a bargain. 3 hives, colony of bees, and 2 supers stuffed with honey.
They were actually, surprisingly, for being in those bushes, that one was actually in very good condition. The others, they'd been stored in a barn, and they were okay.
And so you got the hive of bees, and so how did you learn your craft?
The teacher turned out to be the assistant secretary and the newsletter editor of Wisborough Green Beekeepers Association. So when I went back into school, all of a sudden there was a form pushed in front of me. Sign this and let's have your 7 and 6 or whatever it was, whatever it was. And I really didn't even know that I was joining a beekeeping association. I just did, because I was told, really, just like I do now.
So when did you meet George Wakeford?
Within a couple of weeks of starting beekeeping. really. I think I must have gone to a meeting. And then at the honey show, well, not the honey show, but the flower show where I entered the honey, which must have been about 6 weeks later, I took my honey down there and he helped me out, and I made a dreadful mess of the honey, and he helped me out. I don't think I won a prize, but I'm pretty certain I didn't win a prize. But he helped me out, and George Wakeford, I've written a bit about him on the Whisper Green website, and he is the subject of well, 2 books, but the second one is really the that's it. Yeah, that one. There's the original book inside there, and a man called Jeff Laws, who was one of our members at Whisper Green, he updated that, and he did a really good job of updating it. Yeah, he was a tremendous beekeeper. This character was. I say tremendous beekeeper. He wasn't particularly knowledgeable, but he was the best handler of bees I have ever seen by a very, very, very long way. And what he did at that time was that he had lots of customers, they call them clients these days, to get a bit more money out of them, I suppose. He looked after bees for, I reckoned, 100 customers. And I reckon there were 400 colonies there altogether. Anyway, I soon latched onto him, and I helped him evenings, weekends, and that sort of thing. And I learned an awful lot by just being smoker boy. You don't get smoker boys or smoker girls these days because of, you know, all sorts of reasons. But I learned an awful lot. He wasn't very good at teaching anyone, but in those days, and us country folk, you don't get taught. You learn. You don't get taught, because what you do is you watch people, see what they're doing, and then effectively copy them. And I did exactly the same. And I think that's probably why I'm considered to be a calm handler of bees, simply because I've just basically followed what George did.
And you often talk about observation being a key skill for beekeepers. And,
Yeah.
and do you think that's where that's come from, observing George?
Yeah, well, I think us folk that are born and brought up in the country, there's lots of things going on around us, and you notice things that are different. It could be the sky, or the colour of the leaves on the trees, or the fact that there's more wasps about this year than there were last year. You know, you see things, and you're it's a continual comparison throughout life between one set of circumstances and another.
And what do you think, if George was keeping bees now, what differences do you think he would see to what he had back then?
He's what do you mean in terms of beekeeping?
Yes, yeah. So what's changed in beekeeping from that time when you first learned your craft with George to now, in terms of managing a hive? What's different? What's different now?
Right. Well, obviously, also rape has come in. That came in about the mid-1970s in our area. Up until then, all we did was extract once a year. And a lot of beekeepers in them days worked for sections. Even cut comb hadn't come in at that time. Or if it had, it wasn't written about as much. Of course, that really transformed beekeeping, because I saw ever so many people with absolutely solid sections, and they were actually quite difficult to produce anyway. So obviously rape is one thing. Obviously varroa is another, and quite frankly, that would completely and utterly have flummoxed George Wakeford, and indeed a lot of beekeepers at the time, because once varroa got hold, there were an awful lot of people who gave up beekeeping. They just couldn't cope with it. So they are supposed to two main things. But there's, of course, if you're asking about the changes in my time in beekeeping, there are a huge amount of changes. And don't forget, it wasn't that long after the war was over, and of course, in the sort of 60s, there was still still a lot of people with a make do amend attitude. So instead of most of the hives were WBCs then. Instead of chucking a rotten hive away, as people probably would these days, they would mend it one way or another. I mean, there was nowhere near. There was a lot more money around now than there was in those days. Hive-wise, the vast majority of people had WBCs of one type. Now, people these days, they see the telescopic WBC hive and they think that was original, but it wasn't. The original was straight-sided with plinths all the way around the bottom. Now, of course, the WBC, each manufacturer had their own sizes. So it wasn't a standard size lift like you get these days. Even boxes, internal boxes were different. They were made slightly different. We had a lot of what were called cottage hives. Now, cottage hives were absolutely brilliant. They were. If you can imagine a 10-frame WBC box, but made out of thicker wood, probably 3/4. The vast majority of these were homemade, although the suppliers did make them. And in fact, Thorns, about 3 years ago when they did this centenary, they actually made, well, I didn't call them cottage hives, I think I called them centenary hive or something like that. But they were cottage hives, and all they were was a single brood box, and the legs were screwed or nailed or whatever to the side of the box, and then you put WBC supers on the top, and you had like a lift. It was reversible so that it would go down one way over the outside box, and you'd end up with double wall in the winter. They were really nice little hive. You used everything WBC, used queen excluders. Of course, when I started, very few people had crown boards. They had canvas quilts. And I believe I saw that one of the manufacturers is going back to canvas quilts. I don't know why, but they are. They did have their problems, one of which was that because they went down flat on the frame, and when I talk about canvas, they were like a sort of heavy-duty tarpaulin type canvas, not thin canvas similar to what they make bee suits out of, but it was quite a tough canvas. And what used to happen was, partly because we didn't have wedge top bars, we had what we call split top bars in those days, where the bar was split all the way through, and then you opened it out to push the foundation through. The wax moth used to get in there, and you'd end up with a lot of cocoons and that sort of thing underneath there. So hives would be a change as well. Another one is, although probably not relevant to this evening, is pesticides, because they used to get sprayed or helicopter or aerial spraying, which isn't done now. When the neonicotinoids, I don't know when they came in, 20 years ago now, I suppose. But before then, there were quite heavy losses of through pesticides. And in fact, it was a West Sussex beekeeper, a chap called Dick Tutton, who actually won the day for beekeepers in about the early 1980s now, I suppose. He took one of the suppliers to court, and he actually won the day because he'd lost all his bees, and the supplier basically said, "Well, nothing to do with me," and they won the case, and as a result of that, another one also in West Sussex got settled, I think, within weeks. Of course, in those days, the bees actually died either out in the field or right in front of the hive, where they were rejected by the defenders when they came back. So I suppose they smelt different. And of course, now it's been brought in, and then all sorts of different things are happening these days. Sorry, I'm going away from.
No. Peter Jenkins wonders whether it's calico, not canvas, that they used.
I don't really know. We always used to call them canvas quilts anyway. It's thicker than the normal canvas.
When did you end up?
But excuse me, but Peter's been keeping bees as long as I have, and he would know them anyway. And if he says they're calico, I'm happy to listen to him.
So was the Green Apiary a club, beekeeping club? You were chairman there for 26 years.
Yeah.
And when did you become the apiary manager down at Busby Green?
That was about 16, 17, 18 years ago now, I suppose.
And how did the teaching apiary come about?
Well, what used to happen was that we, for our summer meetings, we used to go to 3 or 4 beekeepers and have a look at their bees. And George Wakeford, who was the beekeeper locally, he used to just inspect them. And poor Georgie, because he didn't tell anybody what he was doing, he just handled these bees. And we used to get 30 or 40 at meetings, I suppose. And of course, most people couldn't see what was going on. They really just came for a natter and a cup of tea sort of thing. Anyway, we used to go to different members each time. So, like I say, 3 or 4 times, once a month type meeting, that sort of thing. And that was amusing because we very often, there was quite a lot of let alone beekeeping in them days. And on more than one occasion, I remember having a cut in or get to the meeting early and cut it away into the bees because nobody looked at them that summer, or apart from putting the supers on. Anyway, as a youngster, I was keen to learn, and I felt I wasn't. And when I was driving around with George Wakeford going from one of his customers to another, I just happened to say something like, I thought we'd learn more if we went to the same person each meeting, see the progression of the colony, or perhaps we could find somewhere and have our own bees. And he said, I think his words were something like, "What do you mean, boys?" So I told him, and he said no more. And a couple of 3 weeks later, we were off somewhere else, and he said, "Do you know that idea for an apiary you had, boy?" He said, "I found somewhere." And in those days, we had a lot of smallish fruit growers locally. They vary between about 4 or 5 acres up to 60 or 80 acres. They're really quite small compared to the larger orchards in the neighbouring county of Kent. Anyway, one of these growers had about half a dozen hives on permanently to do the pollination. And George had spoken to this farmer and asked if we could have an apiary there. And the farmer said, "Yep, you can have it in return for pollinating our fruit." And that was, I think our first meeting was April 1966. And I'd spoken to George about the previous autumn, sort of August, September. And we've been there ever since. And in fact, you've been there, Richard. That's a Dunno's farm one.
Yeah.
So we're really lucky that it's moved about on the farm for various reasons. This is the 3rd position it's been in, but it's a really good area. Well, it's a good place for bees. The area isn't that great because it's always been considered what one might term middling for honey. until obviously rape came in. That is, it's improved now, but the rest of it's quite ordinary. But the ground's poor.
And so that apiary developed over a number of years under your management. And
well, when I took over, we got down to 3 really stroppy colonies, and they were stroppy. And unofficially, the members gave them names. I can't remember what they all were. I think one was Jezebel. And they were in ramshackle hives. And I have to say, we had a problem at Whisper Green. We had to, effectively, we asked somebody to leave, to go and find somewhere else, which they did. And the then chairman said to me, "Look, we've got no manager of the teaching apiary, and we'd never ever had anybody who looked after it full time. There were people who did bits here and there and mend a hive and did a bit of feeding and that sort of thing, but that was it. And at that time, I was still running my business. I was still doing 12, 14-hour days, and I sort of thought about it, and I'd seen the problems that had been caused with this one person. And in 1965, I was one of 2 people at a meeting. Within about 2 years, less than 2 years, we were having 70 at a meeting. And
do you attribute that to having a teaching apiary?
Well, yeah, there was a massive increase in number of beekeepers anyway, but it helped with this person going, because all of a sudden people that had stopped being members or stopped coming to meetings were coming back. And we had an unfortunate situation where we had somebody who thought that teaching apiary was there to I've got to be a bit careful what I say here. Really, just a sort of self-appreciation society, his own appreciation society. So we had 2 groups of beekeepers turn up, and this guy would just get his little group of disciples, and he just started opening the hive without anybody saying, "Look, we can open the hives." He would just go and do it. And we ended up with 2 definite groups of people, and there was his little group and another group, and they infiltrated the committee, and it became quite difficult. I'd rather not go too deep into that. I'm only mentioning it because those sort of things happen everywhere, I'm afraid. It's very rare that an association is completely devoid of those sort of problems.
And fast forward to kind of modern day teaching apiary at Worsborough Green.
So sorry, can I go back just a little bit?
Yeah.
Even 20 years ago, as beekeeping associations weren't as cash rich as they are now. So I made my mind up that I would build it up from the revenue generated from honey sales, bee sales, all sorts of things like that. In fact, I didn't in the end sell bees, but we did it with basically with honey. And we've now got up to where we are, and we'd got I'd revamped the teaching apiary within about 3 years. So got all new kit in. I repaired the old stuff where I could, burnt some, and we have a West Sussex auction, and some of it found its way there, although I wouldn't like to buy it, but people bought it, and it did somebody a favor. So what you see now in the photographs and that sort of thing has all come in the last 16, 18 years.
I was just interested to get across your teaching apiary's approach to beekeepers coming in for the first time, because the beginner beekeepers don't come straight into ordinary beekeeping meetings, do they?
No. What we had was I suppose we're going back 12, 14 years now. What we've always accepted somebody who wanted to start beekeeping. Oh yeah, come to a meeting, and you might get absolutely no more than 2 normally, and that's manageable. But on 2 consecutive Saturdays, we had 32 people who'd never ever seen inside a beehive, 17 on one and 15 on the other. And of course, if you get people coming in who who've never handled bees before, you've got all sorts of problems. You need to find them protective clothing, and you can't have them in too big a group. So of course it took up demonstrators, and I had, well, a few members had words for me and said, look, sorry, but we support new people coming in, but we want to learn as well. And so straight away, I thought, well, what on earth can we do? So I came up with what we call preliminary sessions, and I'll put it to the committee. And initially, I have to say they weren't in favour, but I got a bit pushy, like I apparently occasionally can.
You?
Yeah, me. And they said, "You're okay. Yeah, you're the apiary manager. You handle it." And basically, what it is, people come in who've never. Well, we've got a way of doing things at Whisper Green. So we only really teach one way, and the reason we do that is because, or the reasons we do that is because beginners don't get confused being told 2 or 3 different ways of doing things. And probably the major thing is that if somebody does what they're taught at home and they end up with a problem, either it goes wrong or they misinterpret something, we can generally help them out on the phone or with an email. So anyway, we only teach one way. So new people coming in to beekeeping, or people coming in from outside another association, we show them how we do it and get them up to speed on our way of doing things before they go into the scheduled meetings. So that when they go into scheduled meetings, we're satisfied that they can handle a colony completely on their own, unaided and competently, and that's the main thing. So if they do pick up some bees or something, we're fairly satisfied they can take them at home and they're not going to be a nuisance to the rest of the family and the neighbours. I'm often asked how many of these sessions. Well, let's take the sessions first. Usually 3, no more than 3 per demonstrator, and everybody's coming in and they're all at the same level, so they're not going to feel inhibited by older, more experienced people. That's what I really mean. So they can then go into scheduled meetings, and they're at actually a pretty high standard at that point. How many does it take? Last year we had about 30, I suppose, and I passed 6 very first time out. They just picked it up. It's almost natural. They just picked it up. Some of them were incredibly good. It normally takes about 3 sessions. If they need a little bit more, we give it to them. Once they start getting to about 5 and they're not improving, then we start seeing a few problems. Quite frankly, if they don't get any better at that point, they're unlikely to. And I know it might seem hard that we perhaps discourage people and suggest that perhaps beekeeping isn't for them. But at the end of the day, you've got to think of the bees, you've got to think of the neighbours and those people as well, because they're the ones who are probably going to give up quite quickly. So they buy a boatload of kit, put it down the bottom of the garden, might even get stung a couple of times and think, I don't like this. And what happens to the bees? They abandon them, they leave them there. And it works really well. I've written about it in the Teaching Apiary book that I've only just had published. and anyone can read about it. But I'll tell you this, Richard, it's worked really, really well for Whisper Green, and I think the vast majority of people that now come to meetings have gone through that system, and I think they'll all tell you that they were really pleased that they had that tuition early on. I don't wish to criticise anybody else the way they do things, but there are an awful lot of beekeeping associations that put people through the theory course first and then take them out into the apiary. What I find is it's probably the apiary and the practical side of it that will discourage people and perhaps make them give up. So you've wasted all that time and effort in teaching people, and it doesn't do any good. You might as well take the place up for somebody who's going to is going to benefit.
And you don't beekeep alone either, Roger, do you? You've always got at least 4 legs, most of the time 8 legs, following you around the apiary.
I'm afraid I have, but you obviously refer to the Nell and Rosie. Well, border collies, they're actually quite bright, and they didn't take very long for them to work out that whatever's
in the box.
I tell you what, though, I go around other places, and they can spot a wooden beehive and they can spot a WBC. What they can't spot very well are polyhives, and I've no idea why. Right. No idea why. That they know what sort of long hives are, and the various types of long hives. If they're wooden, they seem to be okay. It's the poly ones that fool them.
They've got the same aversion to polystyrene as you have, then.
Well, I don't say I've got an aversion to polystyrene. It's just when they turned into beehives.
And so your experience doesn't just come from Whisper Green teaching apiary. You've helped out in a lot of different beekeeping organisations. You've done a full term as a British Beekeeping Association trustee. You are obviously involved heavily with BIBBA. You have been a director of the bee disease insurance. So you're coming from all sorts of different angles. Tell us about your experience with those.
Oh, do I have to? Actually, I think they're all basically very, very good organisations. They all serve a purpose, and there's not much real crossover between any of them. So they're all good. There are issues with all of them, which I don't think there's any need to discuss today. But if you get a volunteer amateur organisation, call it what you like, you're always going to get problems, and it's generally people related. It is. It doesn't matter what it is. It's a beekeeping association or a local tennis club. And it's not always directly negative, because it could perhaps just be that somebody has been elected or they become prominent because they've got an ability that has been missing before. So what you end up with is a slight shift going down one route or another. Not that that's a bad thing, but very often if that person backs off, or they don't do their term or whatever, if nobody else takes over, you shift direction again, and it's a constant sort of move in one direction, then move in another. What I have noticed, because I'm involved a long time, there are far more opportunities now that need dealing with very quickly that we never used to have. It used to be that you met every 3 months or whatever, and something came up a week after your last meeting. It would sit in the secretary's in tray, and 2 or 3 months later, out it would come under correspondence, and then you discuss it. These days, for various reasons, there's a much greater urgency. I'm not saying it's wrong, but beekeeping has got to respond much more quickly than we used to. It's probably communications that have that's driven that.
And in 1986,
crikey,
the year that I was born, you became the auctioneer at the West Sussex Beekeeping Association.
Well, I don't know when I actually became auctioneer. All I'll say is I was shown a photograph in a book by a man called Irmgard Daimer, I think his name is, which is an anglicised version of a German book. Now, in there's a photograph taken by an Englishman, the Jeff Laws that I mentioned, who did the work on the George Wakeford book. He took the photograph of me clearly auctioneering at the West Sussex auction, and the book was published in 1986. So it must have been at least the year before. But I can't remember when I became the auctioneer. In fact, West Sussex Association started, I believe, in 1972 or 73. So that again is coming up for a biggie. And it was about 2 years later that somebody who was a sailor said that his sailing club had I think, a kitting out party, they called it. And he suggested that we had a kitting out party. In the very first year, the auction was called Kitting Out Party. And apart from COVID, I have attended every one of them, and I'm the only person still left who's been to every one. We've had over the years 3 beekeeping auctioneers, and a couple of times they've tried professional auctioneers, but that didn't work. You need somebody who knows the people. You need somebody who knows what you're selling, and the price that you really ought to start. So
any funny stories from any of the auctions that you've
cool.
Weirdest thing that you've sold? You've told me in the past that you've seen the same thing rotate through the auctions over a long period of time. That pieces of equipment that people
there are some I can be open with this, I think. There are some apodias, and there are 4 of them, and I must have sold them, I should think, 4 or 5 times. And of course, what happens is, because apodias are so difficult to operate for somebody who's only just got used or just used them, they fail. And I've actually discreetly marked them, and they keep coming back, and I call them the boomerang lots. There was, I don't know if, well, do you remember the MG wax extractor that looked a bit like a watering can?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Right. Okay. They used to be made out of tin plate.
Yeah.
And then one of the manufacturers got them made in stainless steel, and it was this bright gleaming thing that somebody'd obviously bought, didn't know how to use, and it was absolutely brand new. And I sold it one year to somebody for 48 quid, and they a couple of years later they bought it back still unused, and I got 4 quid for it for them.
So you've been demonstrating since?
Well, but on those sort of lines, a chap turned up with a horse box. Now, I mean a lorry horse box, not a trailer, and it was absolutely jam-packed full of modified dating hives. And he wasn't a beekeeper, He did house clearance somewhere, I think, in London, but I'm not too sure, or the outskirts of London. And he found out there were beehives, and he didn't know what to do with them. He'd heard about our auction, so he literally just turned up on the day with this box, horse box, and I thought, crikey, what am I going to do with this lot? Because being the auctioneer, if people bring stuff in, I generally help them lot it, because there's very definitely the right sort of amount to sell. So let's say national supers, I would generally just put them in twos, because the vast majority of people only want a couple. So if somebody brings in 6, I'd say to them, well, in my opinion, there ought to be either 2 or 3 lots, because if you sell them 6, you ain't going to get much more money for them than if you've got 2. Anyway, in those days, it was before booking in, or you could book in, but also bring stuff on the day. Anyway, he turned up on the day quite late, so they were going to be right at the end. And anyway, everyone sort of panicked. I said, well, don't worry, we'll get this lot out. I looked at it, and I quickly worked out there were 90 brood chambers, or over 90 brood chambers. Then the floors that went with them, and a couple of supers each. And I got less than £100 for the whole lot for him. Now, in those days, it wasn't a case of seconds as hive parts. They were absolutely premium. I don't think it was not amongst them all. Absolutely beautiful. Yes, they were quite old. I may be wrong, but I think they must have come from one of the bigger, originally from one of the bigger bee farmers. Might have been somebody like Maddock in Norfolk, but I don't know. There was no, although Maddock had distinctive floors. He had a great big long lighting boards, about 10 inches or a foot long, his did. And I can't remember these things. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, I can tell you a few stories. I was probably booking that, Richard, but
so you built in your beekeeping, you built up to the point where you got about 130 colonies at its peak, and we're semi-commercial at that point. But never worn a bee suit.
No, I'm actually quite proud of the fact I've never even tried one on. They tried to get me into one for a sort of photo shoot on one occasion, well, a video, I think it was. But no, I've never ever even tried to get a bee suit on, or a tunic for that matter. No, I just wear the old-fashioned ring veil, and that's it. But when I started beekeeping, everybody was the same. When bee suits didn't come into about the late 1960s, a few people wore overalls, and some of them wore those blue engineers overalls, and for some reason the bees used to go for them a bit. But somebody told me once why, but I can't remember. It's something to do with the blue dye, I think. No, I've never worn a bee suit in my life. I've never really had a problem. I never found I've had to. The number of hives that I've walked away from in my beekeeping time because we simply could not handle them, I can count on both hands. And 3 of them were on one day.
What's your worst experience as a beekeeper? Probably relating to that time, maybe.
Yeah, I think that was. Yeah, I might also make a point of this one, I suppose, because it was one of our now ex-members, wasn't a regular attendee, came to a meeting and said, I've got some bees, I've got trouble handling them, can somebody come and help me? Well, their handling wasn't the greatest, and I assumed that was what it was. So it was only a short detour from my journey home. So I said I'd go in and have a look. And she had one of these jobs where it was medical related, health related. And if somebody had a problem in the house, she had to drop absolutely everything and go. Anyway, she phoned me up and said that she hang on, wait a minute. I think she came back to me. I can't remember. Anyway, I didn't go in that day. I went to bed a week later and I said, look, don't touch the colonies in the meantime. Let me just have a look at them. Well, I turned up and the bees were 50 miles away, 50 meters away. And Nell was only a puppy then, and I had my old dog Meg, and they got out of the car like I normally do, and it wasn't very long before they got back in again. And these bees were searching the northern hemisphere for anything to put their back ends into. Anyway, it turns out that these were absolutely evil. That they were. It turns out that they come from somebody who had bees on an allotment, and they'd asked if they could have bees, and they were told yes, but they must be gentle. All right, I'll get. I'll put queens in from New Zealand. Well, at the time, a lot of queens came in from New Zealand. They were bright yellow. They looked like lemons, and they were absolutely soft. Anyway, what happened was, of course, next generation down and the generation after that, they turned really nasty. So the beekeeper was called in by the allotment manager. Oh, I'd like a word with you. Bees are a problem. Sort it, will you? Oh, I'll get some more queens. Did exactly the same thing, and exactly the same thing happened. Well, of course, now we know it was F2 aggression, and he had to give up and advertise them in the local paper. And our member bought them, and they were probably the 3 worst colonies I've ever had to deal with. We got them sorted, or I got them sorted, but and they were fine after that.
What's the best way of requeening a colony that's an aggressive colony?
Well, the standard way is to move it. Well, have a look at the weather forecast, see what the next day is going to be. If the next day is going to be a good day, good warm day with the nectar flow on, block the hive up in the evening, move it 10 feet or 10 feet would be okay. In its place, put a small nucleus from preferably another colony, but it doesn't matter. You then milk off the flying bees, and they're usually like to be those that sting. So basically all we got left are house bees, bottle one description, or non-flying bees, let's put it that way. Now, you don't do that on a day that some bees are flying, but it's not a great flying day, because what I reckon is that not all bees fly on days like that. I think the colony finds some other things to do. Anyway, if you get rid of the flying bees, you can normally get in there and get the queen out. That's normal. But none of these would respond like that. So what I did in each case was, and this is a very old trick, if you protect a queen cell, sealed queen cell, and just put that in down between frames, if indeed you can get the supers off, put it down between the frames, what usually happens is you get a supersedure. What usually happens, I've done this quite a lot, and it's the sort of thing that the old beekeepers used to do when I started keeping bees. You very, very rarely hear it now, but somebody within the last 12 months, I should think, has sent me a link to a website where they do the same thing in New Zealand, and somebody's written about it on there. And would you believe they've actually, well, not stolen, but they've taken one of my photographs off the Dave Cushman website, and they haven't even given me credit or even asked me for it. But it doesn't bother me because it's there. So yeah, you can generally supersede. It certainly, I can't really remember what happened in those 3 cases. I know we certainly had some that requeened okay, but I don't know. It's certainly better than 50% anyway. Now, I've since found out that New Zealand beekeepers use that method for requeening. Hang on, sorry. New Zealand commercial beekeepers use that method for requeening. But the older beekeepers used to use it for a bad tempered colony.
So during your beekeeping career, you've always been keen on bee improvement, improving the stocks of bees that you've got. And over that time, you've raised thousands, tens of thousands of queens. What's your preferred method for raising queens?
Well, as you know, I do a lot of teaching, and all the methods, the main methods, in my opinion, they're all just as successful. If anybody has a problem, it's probably down to them not doing something, or they're being a bit clumsy or something like that. But the method I really like for my own personal use is a punch cell method, which I've used for well over 50 years now, and I really like it. It might just be because it was the first method I used, but it's really simple. You select the larva.
How can people find out more about cell punch method?
Why are you laughing?
Go on, this is your moment.
You tell them.
So Roger's released a book through BIBBA, the cell punch method. So if you're interested in that, have a look on the BIBBA website. Sorry, carry on. What do you do? You select.
I've got to say that this method is what I call the original punch cell method. All the other ones that are pushed I think they're very, very fiddly. This particular one, you have a cell punch, and that's the punch that the queen cell is built on. But everybody teaches grafting, and I think probably because it's certainly the most common one, but it's probably also the one that most people know. So of course they're going to push what they know themselves. If you imagine in a comb a larva that you were going to graft, instead of grafting it and run the risk of damaging it, if you just punch it out as a cell and then leave it in the holder, the bees will build onto that. There you are. Where did that come from?
Well, interesting you should mention that, because the Dave Cushman website is a useful tool for all beekeepers. Yeah,
well, they're all my photographs, by the way.
From Dave Cushman, yeah.
Yeah, but okay. Yeah. I really like it, and what we're hoping to do with BIBBA is to get cell punches made so that people can produce a lot of queens for the price, or less than the price of one.
Excellent. So look out for those in the future. How have beekeepers changed over the years, Roger, since when you first started?
Oh, crikey, it's another book, that is. Well, beekeepers themselves have changed, because when I started keeping bees, certainly in my area, 50% of them worked on the land in some way. They were cowmen, or they worked in the various fruit orchards, or they were foresters, or gardeners, or general farm workers, all sorts of things. Quite a lot of nurseries in my area. Then certainly down at the coast there's a lot of tomatoes grown there, and they were all sort of practical people. Now, no disrespect to anyone, the vast majority of people, beekeepers don't work on the land. They come from some other sort of a background, possibly come out into the country. And what I find is that beekeepers are nowhere near as practical as they used to be. Of course, the older beekeepers, a lot of them was second, third generation, so they had a start anyway. And people are coming into beekeeping now absolutely fresh. I mentioned that in the old days, and I don't want to keep going about the old days, but we've got to accept that the things have changed, and we need a different approach to teach beekeeping. The older beekeepers, because of their background and because they were practical, they saw other people do things, and they copied it, and they might have improved on it, and they might not have done. With things in the modern day, there's a different approach. You need to be formally trained at a lot of things, and then have some sort of certification at the end of it. So there's a different sort of a concept. A lot of people these days move house. A lot of beekeepers, when I started, had always been in the same village, or some of them have been in the same house all their life. There's a lot more money about now than there was. So where people used to make their kit or improvise or something like that, the modern beekeeper will just go out and buy, almost whether they need it or not. Another thing is, people these days keep a lot less colonies than they used to, and for a lot less time too. There aren't many beekeepers these days that keep bees for 20 or 30 years like they used to be. I think now the average number of colonies per beekeeper is somewhere between 4 and 5. So it's quite low if you take into account all the beekeepers have got several hundred colonies. So the average beekeeper's probably only got about 3 colonies. But when I started, a lot of beekeepers had 15 plus colonies, anything up to 50. And what they did was they used bees to augment their fairly meagre income. And they'd sell honey at the garden gate, or all sorts of things like WI markets, and those sort of places. So we've where was I going with that? Oh yeah, I know. If you've got more colonies and you're keeping bees longer, you are handling a lot more colonies. So call it colony years if you like, as a sort of term. And all the time you're handling bees, you are learning things, and you'll hopefully will retain that knowledge.
You mentioned Varroa. I think, was it 93 or 92 that it came over here?
Well, yeah, it was first discovered, I think, in 92, but it could have been up here before then.
I see beekeepers like myself that I only started in 2006.
Yeah,
so I'm only a pup when it comes to beekeeping, but I know nothing but keeping bees during with Varroa. What was it like keeping a colony of bees without Varroa there?
Oh, it was an absolute joy. These days, you can lose a colony during the summer quite easily. If you did then, you yourself have done something absolutely stupid. But you can lose a colony now, and I think perhaps it's the viruses.
Mm.
It was an absolute joy because colonies would build up at the right rate.
Bang the supers on and then take them off at the end of the season.
Yeah, well, there's excuse me. There's other things as well. I never really spotted chronic bee paralysis virus till about 15 years ago. And I don't think bees are worker bees are living anywhere near as long. I know there's a problem with queens, and I'll tell you why. Because pre-Varroa, I better not say the old days, but pre-Varroa, you used to get a lot of bees with tattered wings, worker bees with tattered wings, and what it was they literally worn themselves out. You don't see that anywhere near as much now, to the point where I've even been told, and I've heard speakers say that these tattered wings are caused by bees climbing through queen excluders. Oh no, no, it's not. It's caused by them literally wearing their wings out, and there are a lot less of them. So my guess is that the life of a worker bee is possibly, I don't know, a few days or a week less than it used to be. So that's my guess anyway.
We have had a few questions through the chat, but there's just a couple of other things that I want to touch on before we get there. One is you, for a number of years now, have organised speakers for the National Honey Show and the Central Association of Beekeepers, both fantastic organisations. What for you makes a good speaker?
It depends who it is. If it's a practical beekeeping speaker talking about practical beekeeping, I would have expected them to be certainly have done it themselves on a lot of occasions. What I do find these days is people talk about things and they're effectively just reading out of a book. I'll give you an example. It was only a couple of years ago, I heard somebody talking about queen rearing, and they went into great detail. 3 years earlier, that person was in the beginners class, or the introduction to beekeeping at my local association. And there's absolutely no way they'd done all those things, yet they were talking as if they had. If it's somebody who's effectively repeating some scientific work that somebody else has done, or perhaps they're talking about pheromones or queen mating or something of that nature, then clearly they've got to take their content from somebody else's work, not their own, because you can't expect them to know it all. So that then is a case of presentation, and of course where they got their where they got their information from. Scientists, personally, I think the scientists have got a big role to play in beekeeping. I'm finding that it's a lot easier speaking to what I call the modern scientists than it did some of the older ones. I don't know whether it's because they realise now that they need beekeepers to help them out or not, because certainly citizen science has become a much greater thing, which incidentally I support. The only slight problem with that is you need to get the message across to the beekeepers that you're dealing with science. So if you've got to do something, let's say on Tuesday afternoon, you do it on Tuesday afternoon. You don't do it on Wednesday morning because you were mowing the lawn on Tuesday afternoon, something like that. So I think beekeepers can play a big part. Now, there was a scientific lecture last night, a Central Association from, it was really an Australian research, but one of the students was Sri Lankan, and that was dealing with pollination in enclosed areas like polytunnels, and that was really interesting. That was, and that was a good lecture. But some of them just repeat work that somebody else has done, which I have to say I'm not that keen on.
Final question from me then, Roger. What is your biggest fear for beekeeping in the next 10 years?
Crikey.
Sorry, I should have probably preempted you for that one.
No. It's good that you haven't. Okay, then. I'll take a stab at tropicolaelaps being introduced. Well, all right, then. There are notifiable pests that we've got. Can I include tropicolaelaps and small hive beetle? I have not seen a tropicolaelaps, and quite frankly, I don't want to. But there's a very good video by Samuel Ramsey, who's the man who discovered that Varroa actually feed off fat body tissue rather than hemolymph. He's got a talk something like tropicolaelaps, a fate worse than Varroa, something like that. I think there's 2 or 3 of them. Some of them you've got to flick through unless you want a bit of entertainment. He's an amusing speaker. Unless you want a bit of entertainment, flick through it and it will actually frighten you. Now, I've been to the States. In fact, I was talking to somebody last night about going again, doing teaching out there. But I've seen small hive beetle out there, and I'll tell you, folks, you don't want it here. I speak to beekeepers about it, and they don't seem to realise that where the small hive beetle defecates on the combs, it makes the honey unfit for human consumption, and the bees won't even touch it. They won't clear it up. It's a massive problem. Now, I know the people who support imports will say, these will come anyway, but let's assume that they will come in on bees. And personally, I think we've got to discourage people from buying and using imported bees and queens. I won't go as far as say that I support a ban, because I think you'll end up with a black market, and you'll still end up with the same problem. In which case, quite frankly, I think it would be a hanging offence. But that's only a personal view. But as you've hit me like that, I think probably the introduction of the 2 notifiable diseases. Look, let's be serious about it. It's 2022 now, isn't it?
It is.
Right. Both of these were considered so serious by the government that they made them notifiable, 16 years ago?
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Yeah, 16 years ago. Yeah. So, there's an issue. If you don't import, that should cut certainly tropicolaelaps out.
And I know that we get an awful lot of viewers from all over the world, but particularly the United States, and I'm sure that they would agree that, like we've been talking about Varroa this evening and in introduction, they're probably saying, well, yeah, what about the hive beetle? Because that's a pain for management as well.
Yeah. Well, you actually touched on what beekeeping was like when you came into it. We also got exactly the same thing with beekeepers coming in now. I mean, take something simple like the feeding business, the sort of what I call the feed, and if you're not sure, feed again sort of mentality. People are doing it. New people coming into beekeeping, and they're feeding without looking to see if the bees actually need it, simply because they're told to. I don't feed my bees anywhere near as much as anyone else. I don't need to. Anyway.
So there was a couple of questions that came in while you were talking, and I'll try and get through as many as I can. Heather wants to know, regarding that aggressive hive, what do you do with the aggressive flying bees? And also, is it necessary to make the original hive hopelessly queenless before introducing either a queen cell or an unsealed brood frame?
Right. Okay. I don't quite know how to handle this. If you do what I suggested, which is put in a protected queen cell, you don't have to take the old queen out. So you can leave the old queen there and just put the protected queen cell out. And providing you put it in the brood area, you should be okay. Now, that of course is if the colony will let you take the supers off. But you know, you might have to give them boatloads of smoke. Well, not quite boatloads of smoke, but you know what I mean. You have to give them a whole load of smoke in order to do it. And yes, you might have to get kitted up. I came across a New Zealander fairly recently, and what he said was that some of these, I'm not sure if this is right, and I haven't seen any photographs, I haven't seen any videos or anything like that. What he said was that some of the New Zealand commercial beekeepers take a ripe cell that's protected and just push it in through the floor. Now, in my experience, if you turn a queen cell over at 90 degrees, they usually die. So I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure on that one. Right, that's that one. I think there were 3 points that the lady made. Heather, was it? Yeah. Right. The other one is the bad-tempered aggressive bees. Right. If you've got if you change queens, in my experience, this is not what the books will tell you, but in my experience, if you've got a bad-tempered colony and you change a queen for a good-tempered colony, I find within a couple of days, all the flying bees turn good-tempered. I think there's something going on with the pheromones, but I don't know. I know what the books and the teaching is. That it's the bees that are bad-tempered, and you've got to wait for them to die before you see an improvement. That's not my experience, but that is why I wrote a book called Challenge What You're Told.
And that's what I thought for a number of years until I saw you speak somewhere. I think you were in York giving a talk, and you'd said, don't take my word for it, which is what you say regularly. Don't take my word for it. Try it for yourself. And I did. I swapped a touchy colony queen with a colony that was fairly gentle, and I could see a swap in the mentality of the colonies. And within a week, I could see a difference in that touchy colony. So what you say is true.
Well, let's put it this way: it is true some of the time.
Yeah.
That's just because something happens once or twice doesn't mean it's always going to happen. Right, that's one. The other one is so that's got over, and I think there was something else Heather said as well.
Flying bees and
we've got that.
Queenless before you introduced the cell or unsealed brood frame. So
right, yeah. Well,
together.
You say unsealed. I didn't mention unsealed brood frame, but I think she might be thinking about letting them raise a queen off another. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Maria says, I've lost a few colonies in the past to Varroa. I was thinking of treating the next swarm that I catch with oxalic acid dribble as soon as I hive the swarm. Would this be a good idea?
Well, I've never done it, but I've come across people who've done it with a garden sprayer.
Oxalic acid in a garden sprayer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's what I'm told. But I don't recommend any treatment to anyone because if something goes wrong, then I'll feel guilty about it. Now the worrying thing is if you've got a heavily infested swarm, that colony was probably right on the point of collapse.
Yeah.
Might not have had any brood. So I would these days, I think, for a fairly inexperienced beekeeper, and I don't know if the lady was or not, I would always suggest these days isolating a swarm. I don't usually do it myself because I'm experienced to know enough to see if there's a problem with the colony, with the swarm rather.
Yeah, excellent. And your fan has written in with a question, and it says, "Greeting from the west of Ireland. I've been a disciple of Roger's since meeting him at the Honey Show in County Mayo some years ago when he sold me his book. That's how he got us all. Don't worry about that. I have a potential problem that you might be able to solve, Roger.
Go to the doctor.
Then get some cream. I have a double nuke box with colonies either side. How might I extract one of the colonies, ensuring that I don't leave its queen behind?" I have a double nuke box with colonies either side.
That sounds like a standard box split down the middle.
Yeah, so I think they're saying, how does he get that colony out of that box without leaving its queen behind?
I'm assuming both of them have got a queen, right? Would you say that?
Looks like it, yeah.
Well, I think just take the frames out and make sure you got the queen, unless I'm completely.
I wondered whether or not, just reading that question, whether it might be better to take both colonies out and put them in separate nuke boxes.
Yeah.
So you can take the original box away so that the flying bees are coming back to their own box.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm not criticizing the person. I don't like these boxes that are split up, and for the simple reason, well, the reason is that, this is very rarely mentioned. What you find is if one goes queenless, the bees very often migrate to the one with the queen in, round the front door. It's exactly the same as if you've got sort of four mini nukes together, like some people have. If you're raising queens and you miss a queen, you go back next time and one of them's got bees all over the front of it, and the reason is it's taking the bees are migrating from the queenless ones to the one with the queen. So I don't like them. Also, if you need to move one of those nukes out, it's not that easy to bump the bees out the box.
Yeah, I think that's potentially what Porig is saying in his message. Maybe, yeah.
I thought that was a really good idea on one occasion, so I made up several boxes because I've always raised queens, and it was a couple of years, and I decided that it was a waste. Yeah.
2 colonies, each on 3 frames with unmarked queens.
Yeah. Well, the problem is if you take the queen away from one of the colonies, you'll probably find the bees will migrate to one of the others.
Yeah, I think I'd be tempted, Porig, to I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's an Irish name, and I'm not good with Irish names, I've got to admit. I think
it's your pidgin English.
It quite, yeah. I can't pronounce some of the Yorkshire names. I'd be tempted to take both colonies out of that one nuke box and put them into separate nuke boxes when it starts to warm up a bit, and then you can be sure that you've got all the bees out of each side of it.
Hang on, sorry, I thought there was 3, not 2.
I have a double nuke box, so
sorry. Where did you get the 3 from then?
2 colonies, each with 3 frames. So it's
right, okay, yes.
Frames on either side, yeah. So I think it's one of those well-known poly hives with the dividers in, maybe.
I'm sorry. I've given a lot of these things fair trials, and I've decided I don't particularly like them. If other people get on with them, fine. That's okay. That's what beekeeping is all about.
This year, I saw at my teaching apiary some beekeepers leaving in one of the crown board holes a jar with water, like a makeshift contact feeder, and on the other crown board hole had fondant. Do you think that this is a good idea? I was told that the reason is to help the bees dilute the fondant without needing to forage for water.
If it works, it does well. Let's put it this way: fondant, you're not going to do any harm. Water, you're not going to do any harm. So give it a crack and see if it works.
Absolutely.
Personally, I wouldn't do it, but that's no reason why other people can't. And it's not going to harm anything, I don't think.
As long as that water's not dripping on the cluster.
Yeah. Actually, beekeepers very rarely feed, or if indeed feeding, very rarely give water.
Excellent, Roger. That's all the questions that we've got. We've done an hour and a half, which I think we've done very well considering how long we could have gone on for. We're most grateful to you for your for being so open and honest this evening, but also for providing so many beekeepers over the years with your knowledge and expertise, and taking what George Wakeford gave to you and expanding greatly on that, and giving that quite freely to others when they ask for help and support. We've got a few other talks coming up. We've got social immunity in honeybees, how colonies keep themselves healthy. That's Marla Spivak that's speaking. I think that one's going to be a really popular one. So if you're a BIBBA member, make sure you register and get in early on the Zoom meeting. That will be, I believe, live streamed on YouTube as well. So you'll be able to see that. Whether that recording stays up or not, I need to check with Marla. And then we've got two others after that. Beekeeping, can we make it pay? And then another one, moving up the step into semi-commercial beekeeping, and we've also got some question and answer sessions coming up in the pipeline as well. And also, I've forgotten to put that on the slideshow. We have got Dr. Medwell speaking. Yeah, sorry, how could I forget Jane? Speaking to us about being a good beekeeper,
competent beekeeper,
competent beekeeper. She's coming up also in the webinar program, so make sure that you register for that when the link comes out. Anything else that you want to say, Roger, before we go?
No, I don't think so. Apart from you mentioned the moving up, there are a lot of people who are thinking of going from the out and out amateur with a handful of colonies up a bit further. And basically what we'll be doing is we'll be chucking in lots of ideas to help you. So if you know anybody else who's in that position, then ask them to watch in.
Excellent. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, tell YouTube's algorithms that this is a good video to watch by clicking that thumbs up button, and spread the word. BIBBA are providing lots and lots of this kind of material, these wonderful talks, and we want to get it out to the general public. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Good night, everyone.